Natalie, it's all yours.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Phil. I'm Natalie. I am an alcoholic. It's a pleasure to be with y'all this evening. I am on the West Coast, so it's early evening for me still. But one thing that I just love about this online platform is to see where everyone's from and how we can, no matter where we're at in the world, we're connected through this program, through this solution. Through our disease. And it's truly incredible because I have been able to access some people and that I never thought I'd be friends with today. And I always have to be reminded of that page 17 where it explains our fellowship of where people who normally would not mix. And I think Zoom has taken that to an even greater level of where people who normally would not mix. So it's truly a blessing. Yes. So for me, I have a sponsor. I'm actively sponsored. I talk to my sponsor multiple times a week. I sponsor other women. I have a home group. I'm in service, actively engaged in all sides of our triangle because this is a threefold disease and it's a threefold solution of unity, service, and recovery. For me, Alcoholics Anonymous, I always, and I was reflecting on this with my sponsor. I'm going back through the steps again at the moment. And I never imagined I'd be where I'm at today, that I'd be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. But thankfully I am, because Alcoholics Anonymous has not only helped understand what's wrong with me, which was crucial, because when I got here, I had no idea what it meant to be alcoholic. But it's also given me this solution, and this solution it's a design for living for me. It's been so much more, given me more than I ever thought. And for me, kind of how it started is exactly as it says kind of in that doctor's opinion of, for me, I didn't start drinking until I was 18, off and away at college. And for me, I remember that first time alcohol worked for me. It says in Bill's story, it talks about how he discovered liquor. And for me, when I found alcohol, it was this moment because I finally found something that got me level with other people. Is for years, my whole life before that, I remember always just feeling out of place, that something was off with me, that even I could be surrounded by people and still be extremely lonely and anxious. And I thought everyone felt like that. I thought that was just the norm and everyone just kind of handled it better than I did. And for me, when I found alcohol, that changed everything for me. And kind of as I've looked back on my drinking, that allergy was evident from the beginning. Is I had, from the very early stages, once I drank, I had no control of my alcohol consumption whatsoever. Is for me, I would either every time, and I was not a daily drinker for most of my drinking. However, when I did drink, I was either, drinking to that point of passing out, blacking out, or people were telling me it was time to go, that I had had enough, because I would trigger that abnormal reaction that the doctor's opinion talks about. That phenomenon of craving would take hold of me, and nothing could overcome that physical craving for alcohol. And for me, that mental obsession also took hold very quickly, is because it talks about as men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. And that drove me to, every time that, I wasn't drinking, I was planning that next time I would drink, because I could only go so long without alcohol before going insane. And for me, within my first few months of drinking, I ended up progressing pretty quickly and landed myself in the hospital after, because I was suicidal after a night of drinking, and landed in an ER. And for me, I knew at that point that something wasn't right with my drinking, but I just chalked it up to being young. And where I relate so much to Bill's story is those geographic solutions, that if only I change my surroundings, that would fix me. If I would just change who I'm with, where I'm at, change everything, that'd fix me. And so that was my life for about 6 years, was just that series of geographical changes. I enlisted in the Air Force at 19 because I knew I couldn't stay in college. So I needed to, couldn't move home, but I needed to escape everything. And, you know, for a while, you know, I, like I said, and through this whole time, I was never that daily drinker. But as I look back, and especially as I've been going through, and I spent a lot of time in step one, for the second time around, of how evident that unmanageability was in my life through all of that, with or without the alcohol. And for me, that's the core of my disease, is that unmanageability, which is best described as those bedevilments on page 52, is just having trouble with personal relationships, can't control our emotional natures, prey to misery and depression, couldn't make a living, full of fear, had a feeling of uselessness, unhappy, couldn't be a real help to other people. That described my life perfectly. And alcohol was my solution to that. Is the only way to cope with those bedevilments was to change how I felt. And for me, you know, I kept trying to change my surroundings with the hope that, you know, just this next move was going to fix my drinking. And as this, I learned through this program, this is progressive. So every time, you know, I took that move, made that change, that excitement, usually my drinking subsided for a little bit. That excitement kind of kept me off the alcohol. But when I picked up again, it was worse than when I had left off the previous time. And for me, through all of this, you know, I had this was driven by this fear of what people thought of me. And I had to give this illusion to the outside world that everything was okay, that, you know, I felt okay, I could function. And being so wrapped up into appearances drove me to just exert that power of will in every area of my life. And I was successful. And for me, you know, where my drinking kind of picked up for me was when I had everything in this material world lined up. Is, you know, I finally graduated college after about 8 years. You know, graduated college, had one of the best jobs I could get out of college, had been married to, and I'm still married, but had an amazing husband, a house, all of those things. But yet I felt so empty inside all the time. And the only thing that seemed to fix me was alcohol. And, you know, at this time, I remember I couldn't sit with myself. And for me, all I did for months was just go home and drink all weekend and muster enough to get it together to go to work on Monday morning. And that's all I did. And I couldn't function without it. I needed it to feel content for just a little bit. And for me, I remember it was kind of in the winter time of, you know, I was drinking, and I can't remember exactly when that switch happened, but for some reason the alcohol quit working for me. I remember that day that effect that I once had from alcohol wasn't happening anymore. And the one thing that seemed to fix me was failing me. And I was still, you know, suicidal, depressed, anxious, all of that while drinking. And that is kind of where I knew something needed to change, because that probably wasn't normal to continue to feel like that. And for me, you know, I had questioned, just like Bill did in his story of questioning, you know, was I crazy? You know, I remember years before, I always kind of questioned, why is it that when I'm around alcohol, I always get insanely drunk, and people who say they're not going to get drunk tonight are successful, because when I say I'm not going to get drunk tonight, I failed every time. And for me, though, kind of that turning point, though, was I knew I was at that jumping off point that vision for you talks about is, I can't see my life with alcohol, and I can't see it without it. But at this point, I was far from admitting I was alcoholic. Alcoholics Anonymous was the last stop for me, because I was 25 or 26 and thought I had a drinking problem, which was unusual. And for me, though, I had to try to quit, as the book talks about. I needed to go exert my power of will and see if I could try to quit. So I made this was December of 2019, I made my first honest effort to quit. I had decided that I was just anxious and needed some therapy and a psychiatrist, and that would fix me right up. And I was doing that. And it talks about for me, I always go to that those series of self-deception and experimentation that it talks about, more about alcoholism, of swearing off forever, taking more physical exercise, reading inspirational books, going to health farms, all of those things I tried to do. In the 6 months I tried to quit, and I relapsed twice through that. The first time I remember, and this is really where Alcoholics Anonymous has helped me, and see that, I know I was physically powerless over alcohol, but I was far from admitting that mental powerlessness. And for me, that mental powerlessness is best described as on page 24 of just that most powerful desire to stop drinking is of absolutely no avail. And I remember one of the times I relapsed, I was with my dad, and I was determined not to drink. I told him I'm done for good. I swore off, and we go to a bar that night, and I ordered a drink out of the blue. And that's how powerless I am over alcohol. That's how cunning and baffling this disease is, because no matter how much I want to quit, that desire is of no avail. And for me, I tried some more, tried to stay sober on my own. And for me, I finally, went to Alcoholics Anonymous on the suggestion of a therapist. I had seen 3 different ones and was not getting any better. And I always just, in the back of my mind, questioned of why was it so hard for me to quit drinking? It seemed like it was just trudging through mud every single day not to drink. And I couldn't, it's, as it turns out, it's because I'm alcoholic, that I can't stay stopped no matter how much I want to. And for me, I fortunately, I came through these online meetings, and thankfully they were there, because I don't think I would have had the courage to walk into an in-person one on my own at that time. And for me, I came into AA, and I was just going to meetings for a while. I thought I would get this through osmosis, that I would just kind of absorb all the great things and what these people were telling me. I thought I could just get it by going to meetings. And I truly thought that when I came here, that's what Alcoholics Anonymous was just the meetings. And fortunately, I was a few months sober when I stumbled in a group that told me otherwise, that they had instilled that this is a 3-fold program, that the steps are in the big book, which I had not picked up. I skimmed through it briefly. And all I was really doing was that unity side of the triangle. And that wasn't enough to keep me sober. That wasn't enough to keep me whole and keep me full. And I got my first sponsor who took me through the big book. We went page by page, line by line, in excruciating detail. But the enlightenment I had through even just the first step of, I remember I'm going through the book again, exactly the same way I did the first time, with someone else at the moment. And I just remember that I will never have that same experience I had of going through that book the first time ever again, because I remember just the chills I got reading about, that lack of choice, the reading about the allergy, and how could these people in the 1930s write my life story. And for me, when I went through that and truly understood how powerless this is, and for me, I didn't lose everything. I was far from facing consequences from my drinking, but that emotional dark place I was what drove me here. But it's important, especially this time around, for me to see how deadly this is, how big my alcoholism is, and that my human resources are of no avail. Is I can try to exert my human resources, which is, the psychiatrist, the meetings, the just going to meetings, seeing, reading books, all of that. But it talks about that my human resources, as marshaled by the will, were not sufficient. They failed me utterly. And that this lack of power was my dilemma. And I had to find a power by which I could live. And it had to be a power greater than myself. And for me, I stayed away from Alcoholics Anonymous so long because of that 3-letter word that was in some of those steps. And for me, it was comforting to know when I went through, especially going into step 2, is I just needed to be willing to believe, being open-minded. And for me, that clear understanding of step 1 of how powerless I am over alcohol is what drove me to even open that shred of willingness to believe, because I had tried absolutely everything else and it failed me, as I could not stay sober on my own human resources. And for me, kind of what goes hand in hand in that with step 1 is that step 1 and 2 is that unmanageability. And my life is absolutely unmanageable. I can't manage anything. That no matter how much I want this desired outcome, I can't achieve it by my own resources. And for me, for years, I had tried to change those bedevilments of my own resources. And for me, the only thing that has relieved me of those bedevilments is this program and these steps that I have found is my only solution. And for me, especially going through these steps was a life-changing experience. And for me, step 3 was terrifying. That idea of turning my will and my life over to this entity that I didn't understand. But for me, it was leading up to step 3, we talked so much about how my life run on self-will can hardly be a success, and that and I was absolutely convinced, and remember reading those pages and seeing how that I was trying to direct everyone around me, and the show was never coming together as I wanted it to. And I stayed sore. I was bitter. I was resentful. And for me, that also, along with that clear understanding of step 1, is what drove me to do these rest of these steps, because I knew that my defense from alcohol must come from a higher power, because I am powerless. And how I get this connection with this entity is by going through the rest of the steps. And for me, God is deep down inside of me, but it's blocked. And I'm a visual person, is that it's blocked by this 1,000-foot wall of my resentments, my fears, everything that's in my inventory. I'm blocked from this power. So it's to me, it makes sense of why my life's so manageable, because I don't have access to this power yet. And for me, steps 4 through 12 is really removing those things that had been blocking me from God, of taking down those blocks one by one by looking at my resentments, and continuing to really dissect them a little bit, because I remember, questioning of why do I have to do a step 4? What does this have to do with my alcoholism? What does writing about people that made me angry, which to me it was all warranted, of all of why I was angry with them, was justified. But it talks about one of my favorite lines is that when that spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. And my causes and conditions, my spiritual malady is what I'm living in, and how I get rid of that is by overcoming that is doing steps 4 through 9. And for me, that was the turning point. Is, I had been off the alcohol for a while, but going through that 4th step is for me really where things started to change. And I started to get a little bit of empathy. My sponsor currently reminds me on a regular basis that, these steps are teaching me how to love other people. It's really teaching me how to become a loving person, because I'm incapable. Is before working these steps, it was always, what's in it for me? What am I going to get out of this? Even when I'm kind and caring and self-sacrificing, there was always this other side of the coin of, what am I going to get from this? And for me, that's when I live in that selfishness, I get plagued by those bedevilments. And if I'm plagued by those bedevilments, I'm going to look for some relief. And that comes in the form of alcohol. And, especially, I could spend a lot of time talking about steps 4 through 9, especially of, that opportunity to now be of service. And my solution to my alcoholism is to help other people. Is my problem is this excessive concentration on myself. And my solution to that is to help other people. And steps 4, especially steps 4, all the steps are preparing me to do that work. And for me, step 9 is so powerful, because I had this opportunity to start to do God's work, which is driven, in step 7 prayers. I'm turning it all over to God, the good and the bad, because I can't decide what's good and what's bad. And if I start deciding what I think is good, I'm playing God again, and I can't play God. And, all of that is preparing me to go out and do his bidding, which is step 9, and doing those amends. And for me, step 9 really just is where I started to see God, because I'm a skeptic. Is I need to see it to believe it. And for me, the amends process and actually going to these people and just clearing the ground a bit, that I have to be reminded that, amends aren't about me. It reminds me at the beginning of step 9 is that my purpose now is to be a maximum service to God and the people around me. And I need to clear the ground between all of those people that I was resentful towards, that I have ill feelings towards, that I had caused harm towards, which I saw in my 4th step. And I needed to open the door to be helpful to them. And for me, it's amazing how those steps worked, because I remember how cold I was towards so many of those people that I had to make amends to. And I just remember this weight being lifted of just that, those ill feelings just melting away. And I started to feel a little bit of love towards those people, and a little bit of empathy of where they were coming from. And, I was pushed. I drug my feet on amends this first time around, and I drug my feet, but I thankfully was pushed by a sponsor who knew the power of them. And he pushed me to get them done, because I have, as a result of that process, especially doing 4 through 9 as thoroughly as I could, I felt free for the first time ever in my life. I felt that fear started to disappear. And I don't know where that turning point is. Is it step 10 promises me that, I'll start to cease fighting everything and anything, even alcohol. And at some point in that process, that mental obsession was lifted. I don't know when or where it exactly happened, but at some point it was gone. And it's still a little bit surreal sometimes that is the miracle here, because I could not stop thinking about alcohol. And even just doing this work and giving half the effort into this, I still couldn't stop thinking about alcohol. But through the steps, the solution has lifted this connection with God that I've gotten as a result of these steps. It lifted that obsession. And for me, I need to be reminded of that on a daily basis. And kind of, life, what is it like now for me? And it's really living in steps 10, 11, and 12. Currently, I'm going back through the steps again and trying to get that connection with God back. At the moment, I have been feeling a little disconnected. I've gone through step 2 and working on rebuilding this new relationship with God at the moment, because that there's no doubt in my mind that I had the spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. But that experience I had a year and a half ago with God is not enough to keep me sober today. And I have felt those bedevilments start to creep back in again. And I love this book because it gives me this kind of check mark of all of these promises. There's promises in the 5th step, there's promises in the 3rd step, promises in the 9th step, are able to kind of help me check in to see where am I falling short right now. I'm not feeling all of those things at that moment. So where do I need to look at my program to get back on track? And for me, when things are going awry, it comes down to looking at those 3 sides of that triangle of, am I getting to enough meetings? Am I being of service? Am I doing the work that I need to be doing in my program? And for me, it's kind of after especially going through the steps again, because the things that I watch for in 10, because I have to continue to watch for that selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear, is not the same as from a year ago. That has evolved and taken on different forms. And, that's why I have to continue to get ready to do inventory again, to do that thorough house cleaning again, because I have to continue to stay current, to see how my self-will, how my selfishness is manifesting today, because I have to, that to me is today the root of my problem. And, for me, I've been listening to some speakers recently, and I just have to remember that, even though it's the drinking seems far in the past, I remember that behind each of those resentments I get today could be a drink. Is that there could be a drink if I sit in that long enough. If I sit in that fear long enough, I'm gonna be wanting some relief. And for me today, it's been really just digging my heels in. I've been to more meetings than I have in the past few months than I had in a long time, because I'm going back to the basics again. And when I first got into AA and did not have that connection with God, I went to a lot of meetings. I've been meeting with my sponsees way more frequently. And for me, that service side is something that is so dear to me. Is, this program, I can't just go through these steps and not try to carry this message, as it talks about from the beginning, and in this, in the doctor's opinion, it talks about how part of Bill's rehabilitation is that he needed to carry this message to a still suffering alcoholic. And that needs to be part of my rehabilitation every single day. And for me, one of my favorite lines in the big book, I have a lot of favorite lines, so I don't know if it's one of my favorites, is that For if an alcoholic failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others, he could not survive the certain trials and low spots ahead. And that's been ringing true to me. And that's been what's really jumping out at me more recently in this program. And it's that work and self-sacrifice for others. Of course, I have to be of service to alcoholics, but I have to practice these principles in the home. I have to be of service in my home, make sure that, and I am going back to the basics again of if it's just the little things of, if I get something out, putting it away, just those small things, because those small things for me are what add up. And for me, there is nothing like being of service to someone else. And, this program has given me the ability to do that because I was useless. I would try to be of service and I failed. I tried to do something nice for someone, but then I'd end up complaining and whining and all of the like. But this program and it continues to teach me of what it means to really, give freely of myself to someone else with no strings attached. And that's something I have to continue to work on. And I really want to kind of wrap up with that, this program has given me a purpose in my life. Is I felt so lost all the time, and that even though I was working on these goals in the outside world, working to be successful, I still felt so empty. And this program has given me a sense of purpose that I was wanting so bad in my life. And one of it really kind of, when it talks about, once we've gone through the steps and start working with others, it talks about that life will take on new meaning, to watch people recover, to see them help others, to watch loneliness vanish, to see a fellowship grow up about you, to have a host of friends. This is an experience you must not miss. And that is, I think, one of the most beautiful lines, because I'm starting to see that as, I've got some women that are starting to go out and sponsor other women now. And how I build this fellowship is, I recently went through a move across the country from the Midwest to the West Coast. And, coming into a room of AA, I was brand new again and knew no one. But the way I built that fellowship was to get into service and to start trying to sponsor other women. And that is how I've gotten this host of friends that I can count on, and that they can also rely on me for once, and which is something could never be relied on. And this freedom, this sense of purpose, to me is truly something I wouldn't change, trade it for anything. And I constantly have to remind myself as well that, it's easy to get away from this. It's easy to get complacent. And I'm still so new and can get complacent, which is a little scary at times to think, but it's, I know I can't fail if I'm putting my all into this program, that if I'm following these suggestions as outlined in the book, because it's been repeatedly proven among thousands and thousands of alcoholics before me. It's been proven in my sponsor, his sponsor, everyone who I know that has recovered from this. And, that is something that I have recovered from, this hopeless state of mind and body, is I'm never cured of this illness. Is I will always be an alcoholic. I will always be bodily and mentally different than the people around me. That's inevitable, but I don't have to. For me, that kind of hope I got was the word that they used, the word recovered from the beginning. Very early in the book, they use that word recovered. I don't have to suffer the symptoms of this disease. I don't have to suffer from that mental obsession on a daily basis. And all of it is contingent on my spiritual growth, on my progress. Is that if I slip away even from a little bit on those three sides of that triangle, it's free game. I could drink if I start to slip away. But thankfully, I've got, have been brought through this in a way that I can identify it now, when I'm starting to slip up, and I look at, where am I falling short? And for me, when I'm doing, and I see someone has the symbol on as one of their Zoom backgrounds is, when I'm doing all three sides of those triangle in balance, that circle's able to form. Is that circle around it, is I feel content for the first time in my life. I feel whole. I feel complete. And that's this program, these 12 steps has been the only thing that has been given that. And I question it, sometimes I get a little resentful of why do I have to do this? Why am I alcoholic? Why do I need these 12 steps? And, I do. And it's just that's my reality going forward, is that I am alcoholic. It's not going to change. But for me, these 12 steps have really allowed me to, it talks about that it gives us the elements of a way of living that solves all my problems. And I am starting to get full faith in that, because I have seen how these 12 steps have helped me become a better wife. Is for years, I still fall short. I am far from making right on the years of pain and suffering that I caused, but I'm able to identify things now. I'm able to see my behaviors. I'm able to see how I impact other people sometimes. And for me, I am able to start to work towards that ideal, work towards those better things. I've seen how this program has played out in my work. I've switched jobs twice in the last year, and this program, these principles has allowed me to start to get rid of that, help me fall back, because I am fearful, I am full of pride. But these steps have helped me not be driven by those things when it comes to my work, and I'm able to be a productive member at work and be of service at work, and give freely back to my employer and be of service there. We live near family again. I'm able to be of service to my husband's family, who it's hard sometimes, but I am so grateful that I'm in this place that I am, that I'm sober, that I've recovered, because life is so much better when I have that focus, on being of service to other people. And the connections that I've made through this program, some of my closest friends are in these in these rooms, and to be, and I've been reflecting on this too recently, especially as I've been going to a lot more meetings recently, is this fellowship we have is so unique. Is we come from all walks of life, all backgrounds, but yet we're able to come together in this program, set aside our differences to connect. And that is something that I've never experienced before in my life. And I can take for granted sometimes how great this fellowship is, because it doesn't matter where we come from, what we've done. None of that matters. Is that if you're alcoholic and want to get well, you're welcome here. You are absolutely welcome. And that is something so special, is I've never been part of a group that has such a lack of requirements for membership. Is everything, there's this long list of this, that you need to do this, and that is something that it's truly unique. And kind of part of this is I've been really starting to study the traditions and the concepts as well, because this is there's 3 sides of the triangle, there's 36 spiritual principles. And I have found that, studying these traditions and continuing to study this literature is forever, will be a lifelong process, is that I never graduate from this. I want to. I wish I could get that cap and gown and move on and cross the stage and put my big book away, but I can't. This program, and what's especially in these pages of this book, has to be of paramount importance, is that this has to be the most important thing in my life. This relationship with God, this program has to be. And if it's not, everything else will slowly fall apart for me. And I am truly, and especially kind of where I'm at in the steps, I am absolutely convinced that if I drank again, my life would be, I'm doomed. I am doomed to an alcoholic death, that if alcohol will destroy my life. And for me, going through the steps again, I needed to realize that again, and I needed to be reconvinced of that. I needed to see, and on a day, and I've seen it recently, that I need these 12 steps to function, to be level with other people in my life, to feel like I'm part of something, is I need this program and these 12 steps. So I think I've rambled on long enough for you guys, Phil. I hope I made a bit of sense. And please, if anyone is new, please, continue to go to meetings, get a sponsor, work these steps, because and I truly did not think they were going to work when I got here, but they did. And I hope that anyone that hasn't accessed this power yet, that I have through these steps, will, because it's truly one of the best parts of my life. So thank you so much for having me.